What if I told you the main mistake people are making when losing the sale is that they just lose control of the conversation, all right? They don't know what to say next. What we're going to talk about today is called keeping the conversation going, all right? There's 3 easy things that you can focus on to keep the conversation going, and that's what we're going to cover. My name's Devon Gall. I'm your friend and mentor in business, marketing, and sales. Let's jump right into it. So the first thing we need to understand is that every sale is exactly the same, all right? There's always an opening and there's always a close. In that sense that you're always bringing the customer from first contact to now they're signing up, all right? That's what I mean by every sale is exactly the same. Now, if they have no questions, if they have no objections, if they don't interrupt you, perfect world doesn't exist, but if that happens, then it's a straight line from A to B, from open to close, right? That straight line is consisted of 2 rails, right? These are your tracks, or keeping on the rails, right? Getting back on track, right? That's what this terminology means. Is rail 1 is your ABCs, your always be closing. Now don't confuse that with like hard closing or soft closing or directly asking for the business. That's not what we're talking about. Always be closing means, very simply, you're always closing the customer to keep talking to you. There's always a next step that you're closing the customer on staying along on the ride with you, right? So how do you do that? You be an expert. You have great body language. You have great tonality. You have a great enthusiasm. That's what ABC means. So you're always closing throughout. It doesn't mean you're always like morning or afternoon. That's not what always closing means. But you're always closing them to stay with you, right? So you do that through those things we just discussed. So get real good at that. That's one of your main tracks. And then the other track is your presentation, right? This is how do you present? Is it a comparative analysis where you're breaking down what they got versus them showing them with the transitional phrase what you got and then going into a closing loop? Whatever your presentation looks like, you got to get real good at that. So where it's a second nature, where no matter what the customer says, you know the next sentence in your presentation. You always know when they throw the smoke screen, you can just go right to the next sentence. You know exactly what to say, right? So these are your 2 main tracks of the conversation when you're doing a sale. Then we have these other 2 things that are always happening through the sale. So you're always doing a presentation and you're always closing. And then you have this other thing called building rapport, right? And it's not like you just build rapport in just the beginning, or you build rapport in just like the first third of the conversation. You are always building rapport. So rapport building is something that's going along. We can call this like the 3rd rail or whatever. It's something that's always happening throughout the sale, right? Now, building rapport, it depends on what kind of sale you're doing, but always it's going to be just making a human connection, right? Talking baseball. I don't really watch baseball, so I can't really talk baseball, but it's talking about something that's not sales. It's not whatever you're selling. It's not about the product. It's not about the service. It's about them. You know what people love talking about? They love talking about themselves. They love talking about things that they've accomplished. They love talking about places they've went and things they've done and things they've got, right? So this makes it real easy for us. We just start asking questions about it. Hey, are you from the area? These are some basic questions you can ask anyone. How long have you lived in the area? Where do you work? Right? Or maybe you're at their business. You can ask them, how long have you been in business? Right? Maybe you're doing a B2B sale, right? Ask them about their wife. Ask them where their wife works. Ask them about the kids. Now, you're not going to hit them all of these questions all at once, right? That's going to be weird, right? Don't do that. You're sprinkling these in throughout while you're simultaneously doing the presentation and then you're doing your ABCs, right? So you have to do rapport building throughout, because this is going to build likability. This is going to build trust. This is going to humanize you, right? Like they talk about in FBI negotiations, right? You got to humanize that yourself, right? So now You're lowering sales barriers because now you're just a guy, you're just a girl, you're just their buddy, you're just their friend. And now you're not selling them so much. You're showing them an option. You're just showing them what their options are, right? So build rapport. That's one of the other simultaneous things. So we got building rapport, we got ABCs, we got the presentation itself. Then we have this other line. This is, maybe we'll call it the fourth rail. I don't know how, but it's always happening. It's something that's always going to be happening throughout the presentation. It's not something you just do in just the beginning or just the end. Now, this is called gathering intel, right? So again, you can't just pepper them and gather the intel, boom, 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 question like that, right? You need to be strategic about this as you're sprinkling, going back and forth between these four things. You're asking questions about what's their current product or service, what's their current setup like. Ideally, all you're doing is you're identifying their hotspots, you're identifying their pain points, you're identifying their needs, all right? And this is very important because your product or service is amazing. It's the best, right? But the customer only cares about 1, 2, maybe 3 of your 25 awesome features and benefits. So you do not want to get into the trap of talking about all the features and benefits that you have to offer. You want to understand what the customer is looking for, what the person is looking for, and then talk about just those specific hotspots. Just talk about your specific solutions that can solve their pain. All right? And you can only do this if you gather the intel early on in, like, I'd say the first 60 or 70% of the presentation. Now the other part, so you're going to gather intel throughout the presentation, but you are going to make a switch toward the end where you're going to start spending the intel. You're going to start using the intel that you've gathered, all right? So the big mistake here is people try to find out a pain or a hotspot, they identify a need, and then they try to spend it right away. They try to, our product or service can do that. They're still in maybe like the customer breakdown, customer pricing breakdown portion of the presentation itself. They're in the beginning of the presentation, but then they're trying to jump straight to the close and say, oh, I've identified a hotspot or a need. Our product or service can do that. Wrong, don't do that. You want to gather the intel and then put it in your pocket, save it for later. Save it for when you get back, when you get toward the end. Now it's time to spend it. Now it's time to start using these hotspots, start using the pain and use that for closing the deal, right? Now we're in the closing loop, all right? That's when we are hard closing. That's when we are soft closing. That's when we are using our indifference and our sense of urgency type closes, all right? That's toward the end of the presentation, right? So just to recap, you have your straight line from A to B, your pitch, your presentation, your closing loop. That's your presentation. And then you have your ABCs, being an expert, being enthusiastic, having the right tonality, right? And then we have our building relationship questions that we're always going to be building a relationship, building rapport throughout the entire presentation, right? And then we're going to go and have our intel gathering phase, which is gathering in the beginning, and then toward the end, then we're spending the intel when we're closing, right? When we're moving into that closing loop, when we're wrapping up and we're finishing up the deal. All right? So keep control of your conversation by having all these questions figured out before you go in. All right? I gave you a couple great examples, but I suggest write those three things down: presentation, gather intel, build rapport, and come up with your own questions, right? So then when you go in, you already know what you need to do. You will no longer be losing control of the conversation. You will be in control of the conversation because you'll always know what to say next. Thank you so much for coming down. Appreciate y'all. Let's go make some money.